Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sutta study and welcome to the first session of the transition years. Before we start, I think I want to chant the Namo Tassa first. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, today is my first Sutta study class on the Buddhist Insights channel, and I'm very happy to be here. And the way I want to do these Sutta study classes is I want to pick a topic, and then I want to explore that topic with you over the course of a few weeks, because in that way we can explore things in much more detail. And when I've done Sutta study classes in the past, I found that always very beneficial. So the topic I have picked for the first few weeks is what I call the transition years. So we will explore and read suttas together connected with the last years of the Buddha's life, and we will see his preparations for the preservation of his dhamma, and then we will see what happened after his parinibbana, how the early sangha had to find their own way without their founder, without the Buddha. And that is very similar to how we have to practice nowadays without the Buddha. We are also without our founding teacher. So what we'll see is that just as in modern times, even the early sangha already had a lot of the questions that we are debating nowadays or discussing nowadays, such as, for example, issues of gender discrimination or issues of how to find the right balance in our practice between ascetic recluseship on the one hand and between social engagement on the other hand, for example. So this is what I'm planning to do over the course of the next few weeks. And I'm very happy to see that a few people have joined us. I see 12 people are watching. So hello, Tara. Hello, Jens. Hello, Bante Sudaso. Hello, Ayasoma. Nice to see both of you. And welcome to Kumo as well. It's good to see you all. Before we start, I have one more question to ask you, and that is, in this Sāmagāma Sutta, there is a long passage which talks about Vinaya procedures in very much detail and explains how the Buddha instructed the sangha to deal with conflicts that arise in a community. So that passage is not very often taught to lay people, and I think that's also why the Sāmagāma Sutta is not very often picked for a sutta study. And we can definitely skip that passage if it's boring for you. But I was also thinking maybe people are interested because, as I said, it's not taught very often. So maybe this is an opportunity for you to learn if you want to. So please let me know in the chat if you want me to skip or if you want me to go through that passage. And anyway, that passage is in the middle of the sutta, so we can just start reading the sutta while you think about whether you want to hear about that or not. Oh, and hello to and Paula as well. Nice to see both of you. So the sutta is the Sāmagāma Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya number 104. And I'm reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country at Sāmagāma. Now on that occasion, the Nigantanata Buddha, which is the leader of the Jains, also called Mahavira, and the Jains were another renunciate movement at the Buddha's time. So the Nigantanata Buddha had just died at Pava. On his death, the Nigantas divided, split into two, and they had taken to quarreling and brawling and were deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. You do not understand this dhamma and discipline. I understand this dhamma and discipline. How could you understand this dhamma and discipline? Your way is wrong. My way is right. I am consistent. You are inconsistent. What should have been said first, you said last. What should have been said last, you said first. What you had so carefully thought up has been turned inside out. Your assertion has been shown up. You are refuted. Go and learn better, or disentangle yourself if you can. It seemed as if there were nothing but slaughter among the Nigantanatha Buddha's pupils, and his white-clothed lay disciples were disgusted, dismayed, and disappointed with the Nigantanatha Buddha's pupils, as they were with his badly proclaimed and badly expounded Dhamma and discipline, which was unemancipating, unconducive to peace, expounded by one not fully enlightened, and was now, with its shrine broken, left without a refuge. So what we see here is the leader of another religious or ascetic movement at the Buddha's time passed away, and his sangha immediately started to quarrel, and they didn't really know what their dhamma was and what wasn't, what their teaching was and what wasn't, and what their monastic rules were and what wasn't, and the whole sangha broke into quarrels, and it became very unpleasant, and all the lay people turned away, and the whole movement seemed to descend into chaos, basically. And of course, if the lay people turn away, that's a huge problem for a renunciate movement, because we depend on lay people. Without their support, the teaching will be lost very fast, because the renunciants cannot survive. So the Buddhists observed what was going on, and as we will see, they were greatly alarmed. Then the novice Chunda, who had spent the rains at Pava, went to the Venerable Ananda, and after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and told him what was taking place. So the novice Chunda is a younger brother of the Venerable Sariputta, and he also was at Pava, which is the place where the Nigantanatha Buddha passed away, and he saw what was going on, and he felt that it was so important that he traveled from Pava to Sāmagāma, where the Buddha was, which is a few hundred miles on foot through tiger-infested jungles and dangerous roads, to inform the Venerable Ananda and the Buddha about what was going on. And the Venerable Ananda then said to the novice Chunda, "Friend Chunda, this is news that should be told to the Blessed One. Come, let us approach the Blessed One and tell him this." So Ananda is also taking it seriously and thinks that the Buddha needs to be informed. "Yes, Venerable Sir," the novice Chunda replied. Then the Venerable Ananda and the novice Chunda went together to the Blessed One. After paying homage to him, they sat down at one side, and the Venerable Ananda said to the Blessed One, "This novice Chunda, Venerable Sir, says thus: Venerable Sir, the Nigantanatha Buddha has just died. On his death, the Nigantas divided, split into two, and they took to quarreling and brawling and were deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. It seemed as if there were nothing but slaughter. It seems as if there is nothing but slaughter among the Nigantanatha Buddha's pupils, and his white-clothed lay disciples are disgusted, dismayed, and disappointed with the Nigantanatha Buddha's pupils, as they are with his badly proclaimed and badly expounded Dhamma and discipline, which is unemancipating, unconducive to peace, expounded by one not fully enlightened, and is now, with its shrine broken, left without a refuge." I thought, Venerable Sir, let no dispute arise in the Sangha when the Blessed One has gone, for such a dispute would be for the harm and unhappiness of many, for the loss, harm, and suffering of gods and humans. So Ananda directly mentions to the Buddha that he fears that a dispute might arise in the Sangha as well after the Buddha has passed on. And the Buddha replies, "What do you think, Ananda? These things that I have taught you after directly knowing them, that is the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 right kinds of striving, the 4 bases for spiritual power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 enlightenment factors, and the Noble Eightfold Path. Do you see, Ananda, even 2 bhikkhus who make differing assertions about these things?" "No, Venerable Sir, I do not see even 2 bhikkhus who make differing assertions about these things." So the Buddha first asks about his teaching, the fundamentals of his training path, which is this list we see here, which we call the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, or the 37 wings to awakening, because there are 37 items on it, starting from the 4 foundations of mindfulness to the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is a summary of the Buddha that he gives very, very often in many different suttas, which is the fundamentals of his training towards enlightenment, the fundamentals of his path. And the Buddha asks, in the entire sangha of mendicants, are there even 2 people who disagree about this? And Ananda says, no, everybody is completely, fully clear about all these 37 wings to awakening. So in terms of Dhamma, in terms of the fundamentals of Dhamma, everybody is fully clear. And then Ananda continues, but Venerable Sir, there are people who live differential towards the Blessed One, who might, when he has gone, create a dispute in the sangha about livelihood and about the patimokkha. The patimokkha is the collection of monastic rules for the monks and nuns. And such a dispute would be for the harm and unhappiness of many, for the loss, harm, and suffering of gods and humans. So in terms of Dhamma, there is no risk for there being any different opinions in the Sangha, but in terms of Vinaya, the monastic conduct, there are possibilities for a dispute to arise. And we know that that isn't an entirely far-fetched idea, because at the Buddha's time, there were actually conflicts in the Sangha. We know of 2 occasions when there was a schism in the Sangha. Both of them were healed during the Buddha's time. But the one is the very famous incident with Devadatta. I think everybody is familiar with that. And the other one is the so-called conflict at Kosambi, which is exactly what happened. There was a tiny dispute about a matter of Vinaya. 2 fairly senior monastics started quarreling with each other about how to clean the toilet properly. And then that kind of tiny matter got so much out of hand that the entire Sangha at Kosambi split into 2 groups. And everybody was just fighting with each other about this tiny matter. And then the Buddha went there and tried to mediate the conflict. And what actually happened is that all the monks there told the Buddha to leave, and to leave them alone, and to leave them to their quarrels. And after they said that 3 times to the Buddha did actually leave. And they kept on quarreling. And the way that dispute was then eventually resolved is because it got too much for the lay people. So the lay people stopped feeding the monks. And after the monks were hungry for a little while, they concluded that deciding how to clean the toilet wasn't actually that important after all. So they went to the Buddha and they asked for his forgiveness. And then the conflict was healed and they were reconciled. So anyway, we see that there were precedents in the Buddha's time where people did quarrel about Vinaya matters. And Ananda obviously knows that. So that's a concern for him, obviously, especially when the Buddha is no longer there to act as a unifying figure. But the Buddha says, a dispute about livelihood or about the patimokkha would be trifling, Ananda. But should a dispute arise in the Sangha about the path or the way, Such a dispute would be for the harm and unhappiness of many, for the loss, harm, and suffering of gods and humans. So the Buddha says, well, even if there is a conflict about small matters of Vinaya, that's actually not something to be very much concerned about. Because, well, even if a sangha splits and people clean toilets differently in different places, that's not a problem as long as the fundamentals of Dhamma are preserved and everybody knows how to practice properly towards Nibbana. But if that is no longer the case, and if people start quarreling about that, then that will create a huge obstruction for everyone, because then there's a lot of doubt how to practice, and people can no longer trust the Sangha in the same way that they could if there was harmony about the fundamentals of Dhamma. So that is the thing to be most concerned about. And for the rest of the sutta, the Buddha will talk about conflict, how conflict can arise, how conflict should be managed and resolved if it has arisen. And in the end, he will also teach about 6 principles, how to practice so that conflicts don't arise in the first place, how to take preventative steps to make sure that there's harmony in the Sangha. So the Buddha says, there are, Ananda, these 6 roots of disputes. What 6? Here, Ananda, a bhikkhu is angry and resentful. Such a bhikkhu dwells disrespectful and undeferential towards the teacher, towards the Dhamma, and towards the Sangha, and he does not fulfill the training. A bhikkhu who dwells disrespectful and undeferential towards the teacher, towards the Dhamma, and towards the Sangha, and who does not fulfill the training, creates a dispute in the Sangha, which would be for the harm and unhappiness of many, for the loss, harm, and suffering of gods and humans. Now, if you see any such root of dispute, either in yourselves or externally, you should strive to abandon that same evil root of dispute. And if you do not see any such root of dispute, either in yourselves or externally, you should practice in such a way that that same evil root of dispute does not erupt in the future. Thus, there is the abandoning of that evil root of dispute. Thus, there is the non-eruption of that evil root of dispute in the future. So Buddha says there are 6 roots, 6 causes for disputes. And the first one is when somebody is angry and resentful. And I think that's pretty obvious. If you have an angry person in your community, that creates an atmosphere where everybody becomes very tense and where disputes are very easy to arise. And the Buddha says if somebody is angry, then they are disrespectful towards the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and they do not practice properly. And I mean, that's maybe pretty strong language, but it's also kind of obvious because the Buddha teaches to abandon anger, and if you don't make an effort, and if you give in to those defilements and give expression to them, then obviously you're not practicing what the Buddha taught, and in that way, you're disrespecting him and you're not taking his teaching seriously. So if you see in yourself any anger, or if you see anger externally in other persons, you should strive and practice in such a way that the anger over time diminishes and doesn't increase, and eventually is abandoned. And if you don't see that, then still you need to be vigilant and make sure that the anger doesn't arise in the future. So the next root of dispute is a bhikkhu is contemptuous and insolent, envious and avaricious, fraudulent and deceitful, has evil wishes and wrong view, and adheres to their own view, holds on to them tenaciously, and relinquishes them with difficulty. So these are the other 5 roots of dispute. When somebody is contemptuous and insolent, so I think that's pretty obvious. If you have someone in the community who is contemptuous towards others, pretty obvious that would be conflictive. Sorry, I have a little sore throat today. And the next one is being envious and avaricious. I think that's also kind of obvious, but I think in a renunciate movement, in a sangha, that's even more problematic than in a lay community, because in a sangha we don't use money. When we have desires for something, or when we actually have an actual need for something, we might not actually get it. And then we see someone else who has it, and then it's very easy to give rise to envy. So the practice needs to be a lot stronger in order to avoid becoming envious when you have no means to actually get the thing that you want to have or that you need to have. So that's definitely an important point in a monastic sangha. And next point is being fraudulent and deceitful. I think that's also obvious. If somebody is fraudulent, then it's very easy to have a conflict. Next one is having evil wishes and wrong view. That again is very important. When you live in a community, it's very important that the people are like-minded, that everybody has the same goal, that everybody has kind of the same outlook on life, kind of the same view. Because practice is conditioned, it depends on external conditions to some extent. The path is conditioned. So if there's somebody who is not like-minded with all the others, it's very easy for that person to destroy conditions for everyone else. For example, if somebody has wrong view and likes to indulge in sensual things, for example, likes to play music or likes to constantly socialize and invites lots of people to come into the monastery, and there's always a lot of things going on, then these kind of activities will destroy the ability of everyone else to practice in seclusion and to practice in a quiet environment. So having similar views and not having wrong views especially is very important. Also, if you have actual wrong views about the Dhamma, then it's very easy to lead to a lot of discussions and disputes, and a lot of people will disagree with you in the Sangha. So there's constant tension between you and the other monastics. So that definitely would be a big problem. And the next one is one adheres to their own views, holds on to them tenaciously, and relinquishes them with difficulty. So this is a person who is very stubborn. And again, this is obviously a problem in every kind of community, but in a monastic sangha it's even more problematic, because in monastic sanghas we are supposed by the Vinaya to make decisions unanimously in harmony. So one person can hold everybody else hostage. So if they never agree with anyone else, then everybody has to do what they want. Otherwise, there's no agreement and no decision can ever go ahead. So somebody who is very stubborn can create a lot of tension in the Sangha, because all the decisions will just simply be blocked if they cannot come to a compromise with everybody else. So these are the 6 roots of dispute. And now we're coming to the passage about Vinaya procedures for resolving conflict. And I see one person, Paula, has posted she wants me to go through the passage, and everybody else doesn't seem to have an opinion. So I think we'll just go through the passage, since nobody else posted. So the Buddha continues. Ananda, there are these 4 kinds of litigation. What for? Litigation because of a dispute, litigation because of an accusation, litigation because of an offense, and litigation concerning proceedings. These are the 4 kinds of litigation. So the word that is translated as litigation here in Pali is called adhikarana, and is usually just translated as disciplinary issue or just issue. And I think that's a little better to use, because litigation sounds very much like a court proceeding or something very problematic, and not all of these cases are actually problematic. So I would just substitute the word litigation from now on with the word disciplinary issue or just issue. And when the Sangha has to solve certain issues, the Buddha has laid down very specific procedures how to go about that, and they come in 4 categories that I mentioned here. Number 1, disputes, then accusations, that is, somebody accuses another monastic of having committed an offense, having broken the monastic code. The third one is offense issues, somebody wants to clear an offense that they have committed. And the fourth one is any other kind of proceedings that require a formal ceremony, for example, reciting the monastic code on the Uposatha days, on the full and new moon days, or an ordination, for example, and various other kind of things. And that last category is usually not very conflictive. That's usually something that is easy to deal with. So that's why I think it's not really proper to use the word litigation in that context. Anyway, and for those 4 kinds of categories, 4 categories of issues, the Buddha has laid down 7 procedures how to deal with them. And the first one is coming now. Ananda, there are these 7 kinds of settlement of issues. For the settlement and pacification of issues whenever they arise, removal of issues by confrontation may be provided. Removal of issues on account of memory may be provided. Removal of issues on account of past insanity may be provided. The effecting of acknowledgement of an offence, the opinion of the majority, the pronouncement of bad character against someone, and covering over with grass. So these are the 7, and the first one is coming up. And how is there removal of litigation by confrontation? Again, the word translated here as confrontation in Pali is the word sammukha, and sammukha actually just means face to face, or it can mean in the presence of somebody. So it's not so confrontation again isn't really a good word, because it doesn't have to be confrontational. It just means everybody has to be together, and that can be totally in harmony and without any tension. But it means that in the Sangha we cannot make decisions if somebody is not present. Everybody has to be present, and especially if there's a conflict, all the sides need to be there so that there is no talk behind somebody's back, and so that nobody feels excluded by the decision-making process, and everybody has a chance to be heard, and everybody has a chance to give input. And as I said, everything has to be decided usually unanimously. So you can't just leave somebody out and then make a unanimous decision without, because you know the other person wouldn't agree. So everybody has to be there, and this is a principle that applies to all kinds of issues in the Sangha. And now the Buddha explains this in the context of disputes, but it does apply to all the other issues as well. So in the context of a dispute, the Buddha says, here bhikkhus are disputing. It is dhamma or it is not dhamma, or it is discipline or it is not discipline. Those bhikkhus should all meet together in concord. Then, having met together, the guideline of the Dhamma should be drawn out. Once the guideline of the Dhamma has been drawn out, that litigation should be settled in a way that accords with it. Such is the removal of issues by being face to face. And so there comes to be the settlement of some issues here by removal of issues by being face to face. So what the Buddha says is everybody meets together, and then they should establish what is the Dhamma and what is the Vinaya. And once everybody agrees on that, then they should settle the issue, the conflict or the dispute in the way that agrees with the Dhamma. So being face-to-face, the first point, settling of issues by being face-to-face, has 2 points. Number 1, all the bhikkhus or bhikkhunis need to be present. So the people have to be face to face, but also they have to be in the presence of the Dhamma. If they settle the issue in a way that does not accord with Dhamma, even if they all agree, then that decision isn't fit to stand and can be revised at a later date, or should be revised at a later date. And the Buddha continues, and how is there the opinion of a majority? If those bhikkhus cannot settle that issue in that dwelling place, they should go to a dwelling place where there is a greater number of bhikkhus. There they should all meet together in concord. Then, having met together, the guideline of the Dhamma should be drawn out. Once the guideline of the Dhamma has been drawn out, that litigation should be settled in a way that accords with it. Such is the opinion of a majority. And so there comes to be the settlement of some litigations here by the opinion of a majority. So this is the second way of settling a dispute. And the way it is explained here is actually an abbreviated version. It's more complicated in the Vinaya. So what is explained here is that if they go through the first procedure and they all meet together and cannot agree, then they should go to a monastery where there is a larger sangha. And usually if that happens in real life, people would go to a place where there is a respected teacher that everybody agrees on, that everybody looks up to, or a respected elder. Just somebody who is neutral in the conflict and who is accepted by all parties. And then again, the larger sangha and that old sangha, they should all meet together. They again should try to establish what is the Dhamma and then settle the conflict in accordance with that. And if that fails again, that is explained now in the Vinaya, that isn't explained here in the text. If that fails again, they should try with a few more different monasteries. And if it fails in every place, then they should take a majority vote. And the majority vote is only valid if it is in accordance with Dhamma. So that is a very risky procedure, because the side that doesn't win the vote could always say, well, it wasn't done in accordance with Dhamma, and it's possible that they wouldn't accept the solution, and it's possible that the conflict would still go on. So a majority vote should be avoided if possible. If possible, it's much better to come to a unanimous solution. Anyway, so these are both ways to deal with disputes. And now we come to the ways how to deal with offenses or with accusations. And how is there removal of issues on account of memory? Here one bhikkhu reproves another bhikkhu for such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet. Does the Venerable One remember having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet? He says, I do not, friends, remember having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet. In his case, removal of issues on account of memory should be pronounced. Such is the removal of issues on account of memory. And so there comes to be the settlement of some issues here by removal of issues on account of memory. So this is a case where somebody is accused and they clearly remember they haven't committed that kind of offense. They're innocent. So they say, I'm innocent, and the issue is removed through that account of memory, because they clearly remember they haven't done it. And how is there removal of issues on account of past insanity? Here one bhikkhu reproves another bhikkhu for such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet. Does the Venerable One remember having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet? He says, I do not, friends, remember having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet. By the way, the feet means a parajika offense. So that is an offense that if you commit this kind of offense, you're immediately expelled from the sangha, and you cannot ordain again in this life. So it's taken very, very seriously by the sangha. And we have 8 parajika rules. 4 of them are shared between bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and 4 of them are for bhikkhunis only. And as I said, they're very serious. They're like killing a human being, for example, stealing something of significant value, sexual intercourse, and also claiming a superhuman state that you don't actually have. For example, claiming that you have jhanas or that you have a stage of enlightenment if you don't actually have that. So if you do that, you're immediately expelled from the sangha. Okay. Anyway, coming back to the text, the one bhikkhu was accused, and he said, "I don't remember." But the first bhikkhu doesn't let it go. He's quite sure of what he has seen or heard. And despite the denial, the former presses the latter further. Surely the Venerable One must know quite well if he remembers having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet. He says, "I had gone mad, friend. I was out of my mind. And when I was mad, I said and did many things improper for a recluse. I do not remember. I was mad when I did that." In his case, removal of issues on account of past insanity should be pronounced. So if somebody was insane at the time, then they cannot be responsible for their actions, so the issue is resolved through that. And how is there the effecting of acknowledgement of an offense? Here a bhikkhu, whether reproved or unreproved, remembers an offense, reveals it, and discloses it. He should go to a senior bhikkhu, and after arranging his robe on one shoulder, he should pay homage at his feet. Then, sitting on his heels, he should raise his hands, palms together, and say, "Venerable Sir, I have committed such and such an offense. I confess it." The other says, "Do you see?" "Yes, I see." "Will you practice restraint in the future?" "I will practice restraint in the future." Such is the effecting of acknowledgement of an offense. So in this case, either somebody is accused and he admits it straight away and goes through the appropriate procedure to clear it, either the procedure that is laid down here, or if it is a more serious offense, then there are more elaborate, more complicated procedures to go through. But that person immediately acknowledges that there was an offense and really wants to clear it. And the other option is nobody even accuses them, and that is the normal option. That is what usually happens. You know yourself that you've done something that was against the monastic rules, and you, out of your own accord, go to someone else and just confess it. And then that offense is immediately removed. And how is there the pronouncement of bad character against someone? Here one bhikkhu reproves another for such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet. Does the Venerable One remember having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet? He says, "I do not, friends, remember having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet." But the first one doesn't believe him and says, "Despite the denial, the former presses the latter further. Surely the Venerable One must know quite well if he remembers having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet." He says, "I do not, friends, remember having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet. But, friends, I remember having committed such and such a minor offense." Despite the denial, the former presses the latter further. Surely the Venerable One must know quite well if he remembers having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet. He says, "Friends, when not asked, I acknowledged having committed this minor offense. So when asked, why shouldn't I acknowledge having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet?" The other says, "Friend, if you had not been asked, you would not have acknowledged having committed this minor offense. So why, when asked, would you acknowledge having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet? Surely the Venerable One must know quite well if he remembers having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet." He says, "Okay, I remember, friends, having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet. I was joking, I was raving when I said that I did not remember having committed such and such a grave offense, one involving the feet or bordering on the feet." Such is the pronouncement of bad character against someone. So this is the case where somebody lies to the sangha and tries to avoid the topic and doesn't properly own up to his mistakes, or her mistakes, their mistakes, and wastes a lot of time of the sangha and again lies to them. So in that case, that person doesn't only need to go through the appropriate procedures to clear the offense, but they also have this procedure carried out against them, which is called Pronouncement of Bad Character against someone. So that imposes additional restrictions on them for a while. And when they abide by the restrictions and show that they genuinely changed their character and that they regret what they did and that they're now behaving in a better way, then those restrictions can be lifted again. Yes, so the last 4 procedures we have seen were procedures dealing with offenses and accusations, especially accusations. And the first one was cleared because somebody was innocent. The next one was because somebody was mad. The third one was cleared because the person owned up to their mistake and went through the appropriate procedures. And the fourth one was if somebody doesn't and behaves badly, then there is this pronouncement of bad character against them. And now is the last procedure, which is called covering over with grass. Here, when bhikkhus have taken to quarreling and brawling and are deep in disputes, they may have said and done many things improper for a recluse. Those bhikkhus should all meet together in concord. When they have met together, a wise bhikkhu among the bhikkhus who side together on the one part should rise from his seat, and after arranging his robe on one shoulder, he should raise his hands, palms together, and call for an enactment of the sangha thus. Let the venerable sangha hear me. When we took to quarreling and brawling and were deep in disputes, we said and did many things improper for a recluse. If it is approved by the sangha, then for the good of the venerable ones and for my own good in the midst of the sangha, I shall confess, by the method of covering over with grass, any offences of these venerable ones and any offences of my own, except for those which call for serious censure and those connected with the laity. And then a bhikkhu from the other group gets up and does the same thing. So this is a case where people are really disputing, and this is the procedure that was carried out, for example, in the Kosambi conflict. And everybody commits a lot of offenses, and because people are just speaking harshly and abusively about each other and maybe lying and maybe doing a lot of unskillful things. So if you try to sort it all out and deal with them one by one, the conflict would just get bigger, because then people start accusing each other and then they get more angry, and it doesn't seem very beneficial. So in that case, if people agree, if everybody agrees, both sides need to agree, they can do this kind of procedure, and that will remove all the more minor offenses that were committed during this conflict. The only things that are accepted that are not cleared are offenses that call for serious censure. So those are offenses called sangha suspension offenses, which require more elaborate procedures to go through. And they are also quite rare, so people would usually remember and could go through the appropriate procedures if necessary. And also those connected with the laity means if somebody has insulted a layperson, then it's not enough to go through a sangha procedure. That person actually has to go to the layperson and ask for their forgiveness before they can clear the offense. So these are the 7 methods to deal with issues in the sangha. Again, the 4 issues that are there are disputes, accusations, offenses, and proceedings. And all issues need to be dealt with in the presence of everybody. And dispute issues can be cleared either by just meeting together and trying to find what is in accordance with dhamma, or by a majority vote, or by the method of covering over with grass. And accusations can be resolved by innocence, by past insanity by the confession of the offense or by the pronouncement of bad character. Offense issues are cleared by just confessing the offense or going through the appropriate procedure. And of course, proceedings do not need specific methods to settle conflicts, because proceedings usually don't have any specific conflicts. They're just ordinary ceremonies that the sangha goes through. So these are the methods for settling conflicts in the sangha. And now the Buddha teaches 6 principles of cordiality, which are principles that if everybody practices them, then they would act as a preventive measure and would make sure that no conflict arises in the first place. So that is obviously the most desirable way of doing things. And the Buddha says, Ananda, there are these 6 principles of cordiality that create love and respect and conduce to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. What are the 6? Here, a bhikkhu maintains bodily acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards his companions in the holy life. This is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. So, practicing metta, and we will see the next 2 are practicing metta by verbal acts of loving kindness and practicing metta by mental acts of loving kindness. So the first 3 of the 6 principles are actually metta practice. And when we think of metta practice, it's often like we sit in meditation and we just cultivate mind states. So that is mental kind of metta. But of course, when we live together with others, we should also practice metta in our daily life by speaking and by our actions. And the Buddha says do that both openly and privately. That is, when you're face to face with the person, speak in a kind way, do kind things for them, help each other. But also when they're not present, you should still, when you talk about others, talk about them with metta. And when they're not present, you can still do kind actions for them. For example, if you see one of your community members has their laundry outside on the line and it starts raining, you bring them in. Or if they forgot to do something, you just quickly do it so that nobody else gets angry with them or that they don't feel bad, so that there is no actual potential for a conflict to arise. So both face-to-face and when they're not present, metta practice is hugely important in communities. And the Buddha continues, again, a bhikkhu enjoys things in common with his virtuous companions in the holy life. Without making reservations, he shares with them any gain of a kind that accords with the Dhamma and has been obtained in a way that accords with the Dhamma, including even what is in his bowl. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. So this means sharing all your things without making reservations. And again, sharing things is also an antidote to one of the roots of dispute, which was envy. So if you can share all your things with the others, there is no need for envy to arise, or no reason for envy to arise. And as the text says here, even what is in your bowl. And in most settings that have a monastic context with an established community, there is not much opportunity to practice in this way. But in some other communities, especially in the way the early Sangha was practicing, where they actually did go on alms round, and in the early Sangha, what we see in the text is they didn't go on alms round all together. They actually did go individually. So it's quite possible that one person would get a lot of things while the other got nothing, or one person would get more things or would get special things. And in that case, it's very much possible to share. And I myself have some experience with that kind of lifestyle because I have lived in that way with a wandering monastic community at some point during my monastic life for quite a while. And we did go on alms round, and we didn't live in any specific place. We actually wandered from place to place, and very often we didn't really quite know where we were going to stay in the evening. Sometimes we didn't know. I shouldn't say very often. Sometimes we didn't know. And usually we went on alms round every day, and we didn't know, we didn't have anything much planned. So, and sometimes, usually we would split up, and one group went to one place and another group went to another place. And if one group got something special, then they would usually come and find the other group so that they could share. And sometimes one group, usually the female group, got a lot less than the male group, because they definitely, when you live that kind of lifestyle, you see that there's a huge bias. So the monks came and shared their things with us sometimes. So that was quite nice, and that definitely felt like a very good way to strengthen a community. And I remember one time I was coming back from my alms round with a full bowl, and one of my friends was just going out, and it was quite late already, and her bowl was completely empty. So I gave her half of the things in my bowl. And that way of giving and sharing, usually monastics don't have much opportunity to share material things. We have opportunity only to share dhamma. But in that kind of setting, you can actually share even the contents in your bowl. So that is definitely a very good way to strengthen a community. And I think in a context of a wandering sangha, as it was in the Buddha's time, that would have been very important, maybe more important than it is now. And again, a bhikkhu dwells both in public and in private, possessing in common with his companions in the holy life those virtues that are unbroken, untorn, unblotched, unmottled, liberating, commended by the wise, not misapprehended, and conducive to concentration. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. So the next point we see is that people should keep the sila, in the virtue sila, the training precepts, in the same way. And again, that is something that very much strengthens a community, because then we can support each other. And if somebody feels a little lazy and doesn't really follow one of the rules, or there is a very strong defilement in the mind that pushes you to do something that you know is kind of a little bit unwholesome, then you can reflect on all the people around you who are keeping the precept, and then you can get a little extra boost to your mindfulness and refrain from doing that unskillful thing. And again, that is a hugely important thing in monastic life. And I have actually stayed in many different communities. I have stayed in communities where Vinaya was practiced very well, and in communities where other people, the majority of the other people, did not keep Vinaya in the same way I did. And then things get very, very tough, because lay people observe what is going on, and lay people then sometimes put a lot of pressure on those that keep Vinaya to stop keeping Vinaya, because it makes things more difficult for the lay people. Like, for example, if you don't handle money, you need a lay person to accompany you when you, for example, need to see the doctor, or when you need to get some medicine, or when you need to go places. And if everybody else in your community doesn't do that, then they think that you're very demanding and very difficult. Or sometimes some people are very close with lay people and socialize a lot. And there are also rules that should kind of prevent that. So, but if other people do it and you don't do it, then you seem hostile. And there's just an endless amount of problems in communities if people don't keep precepts in the same way. So that is, again, a very important principle. And the last one is, again, a bhikkhu dwells both in public and in private, possessing in common with his companions in the holy life that view that is noble and liberating, and leads the one who practices in accordance with it to the complete destruction of suffering. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. So this list of 6 principles is actually found in many places in the suttas, and one very prominent place where it is found is in the Kosambi Sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya number 48. And there the Buddha adds to this list, and he says, of these 6 principles of cordiality, the chief, the most cohesive, and the most unifying one is that view that is noble and liberating and leads the one who practices in accordance with it to the complete destruction of suffering. And he gives a simile and says, just as the chief, the most cohesive, and the most unifying part of a pinnacled house is the pinnacle itself, so too the chief, the most cohesive, and the most unifying of these 6 principles of cordiality is that view that is noble and liberating and leads the one who practices in accordance with it to the complete destruction of suffering. So having the same view is the most important of these 6, because having right view, when somebody has right view, their whole outlook on life is completely opposite through nearly every other being in samsara. They're basically running in completely the opposite direction. And the only people who have the same view are other people who have attained to stages on the path, or to some extent people who are training towards attaining stages on the path. So if you're on your own and you have a view that just opposes literally everyone else, it's very difficult. But if you have a community that supports you, that is a huge help on the path. But if you don't have that same view, then again you have constant conflicts and constant disagreements, because your entire outlook on life is just fundamentally different. So that is why that is the absolute foundation of harmony. And because you know that so few people actually have the same view that you have, you tend to value those people, and you tend to take them very seriously, and you tend to take their opinions very seriously. So you would usually really try to avoid getting into a conflict with such people. So these are the 6 principles of cordiality that create love and respect and conduce to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. If, Ananda, you undertake and maintain these 6 principles of cordiality, do you see any course of speech, trivial or gross, that you could not endure? No, Venerable Sir. So these last 2 sentences seem a little bit out of place here. It's just a very, very strange turn here, but these 2 sentences are a direct reference, a direct quote from a very important sutta, which is called the Simile of the Saw, the Kakachupama Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 21. And these are the 2 sentences that occur in that Simile of the Saw Sutta straight after the Buddha has introduced the Simile of the Saw. So there in the other sutta, the Buddha says, even if bandits were to sever you limb by limb with a 2-handled saw, one who gave rise to a mind of hate towards them would not be carrying out my teaching. Therefore, because you should train thus, our minds will be unaffected, and we shall utter no evil words. We will abide compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. So this is a direct reference to the Simile of the Saw. And we know that we should practice in a way where even if people tear our body apart, we will not let go of our metta. Then if somebody just, addresses us with wrong speech or with harsh speech or with something that can create a conflict, how much more would we not let go of our metta then? And how much more would it be possible for us to avoid the conflict because we just wouldn't give rise to any anger? So that's why that quote here is a direct reference to that simile. And that's why I think the Buddha brings it up here. Because that simile is very famous now, and it must have been very famous back then, so people would have noticed the connection there without the Buddha having to fully spell out what's going on. And the Buddha says, therefore, Ananda, undertake and maintain these 6 principles of cordiality that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. That is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So, this is the sutta for today. We have seen in this sutta, just to recap briefly, the Jain Sangha split in into various conflictive parties after the Jain leader died. The Buddhist Sangha was very concerned about that. They talked to the Buddha about it, and the Buddha first made sure that everybody is clear about the fundamentals of Dhamma, and then turned to an instruction of how disputes arise, how to settle disputes in the Sangha, and what kind of practices to undertake to prevent disputes from arising in the first place. And that is the sutta I wanted to discuss today. I hope you liked it. And I see there was a lot of discussion going on in the comments. So I will see if I can answer a few questions now. So Buddha Ruchi says, Aya, in the example of a monastic's envy for what another has, can you not merely say, please share with me, assuming you really need it? Well, if you have a good relationship, of course you can say that, and even if you don't have a good relationship, you can always ask. But of course, that is the best option. That you can always do that, and you can always try that. Just sometimes that might not work. Sometimes other people just don't want to share. Sometimes people are difficult, and then the only thing you can practice there is equanimity and letting go. But definitely, if you have a good relationship with them, or even just an ordinary relationship with them, if they're reasonable people, you can just ask and they could share with you. Okay, and a few more people were happy to go through the passage. Okay, I'm very happy to hear that you weren't bored. Okay, so Bhante Sudaso has a question about the Pali. The line Sani Patitva Dhamma Neti Samanumajittabba. This looks to me to mean after gathering, they agree to be guided by Dhamma. What do you think? So I think that refers to the procedure, the Sammukha Vinaya procedure. I haven't actually looked at the Pali text of this sutta in much detail, or actually in any detail. So I'm just assuming that this refers to the first procedure, removal of litigation by being in the presence of or being face to face. Yeah, it could very well mean that, but I think in the end it sort of doesn't really change the meaning very much, does it? Because as I explained, they meet together and then try to see what the Dhamma is and then try to follow that. So yeah, it's a bit difficult for me to comment on the Pali because I haven't had a detailed look at it. So maybe we can discuss that at another time. I'm sorry I can't really answer that now. Kumu says, wonderful sutta for lay people as well. I'm glad you liked it. Okay, Bhante Sudaso says, again, read the line, a disagreement about livelihood or the Patimokkha rules is minor, the Agama version has, and then he cites the Chinese. And it's really, really tiny on my screen, so I have to see. Oh, it's so small. It's really, really difficult to see. Maybe I'll just leave that question aside and I will answer to you privately because I think it's really difficult for me to see now. I will definitely send you an email about this. And Buddha Ruchi says, thank you, Aya, for your sharing this Dhamma and answering my question. And I think Bhante Sudaso follows up, so I will answer you by email. And Buddha Ruchi says, I see that in Chinese sanghas here in New York City, monastics handle money, shop, and often cook for themselves. May we say then that the main problem is when there are conflicts on these issues? Yeah, so basically that also happens very much in not only in Chinese communities, generally in Buddhist communities all around the world. The vast majority of communities do handle money and shop and sometimes cook for themselves. So yeah, of course, if everybody agrees on not following the precepts, then there is no problem. Then yeah, it's kind of comfortable for those people. But for somebody who wants to follow the precepts, it's very, very difficult to find a community that actually will support their practice. That is the main problem with, people handling things differently. Those who are actually sincere have trouble getting the support that they need. Yeah, in other words, when the Sangha agrees to do these things based on current conditions, would it be okay? Well, it would be, the community will be in harmony. In terms of Vinaya, it wouldn't really be okay. Like, the question, for example, of using money was a question that was debated the whole time, even straight after the Buddha's death. And it was one of the points that was discussed in the second council and refuted in the second council, because even at the second council, which was held roughly 100 years after the Buddha, so a very long time ago, people already said, well, conditions have changed and now we need to use money and there's no way around it. So this has been an argument that has been used basically ever since the precept was laid down. So in terms of Vinaya, it wouldn't be okay, but for those communities, at least there wouldn't be a conflict. And Paula says, it was good to hear about the governing principles in Buddha's time. In your Sangha, how often do you solve disciplinary actions? Well, I personally live only with one other nun. So my Sangha is really small. And the other nun is a samaneri. So we usually don't have many conflicts. Number one, we live pretty secluded. So when you live secluded, there is less potential for personalities to clash. But also when we disagree, we just talk things through. It has happened that we didn't agree on things, and we both really tried to see the other person's perspective, and we usually did come to a very good solution. So far we haven't actually had to use any of the more elaborate procedures, but when things arise, we always make a point to discuss it with the other person face to face. We don't discuss it with, we really make a point not to go to lay people when we don't have the approval of the second nun. And if there are things to be discussed, then we would go together and talk to the lay people together, just to make sure that everybody is informed about what's going on and that there wouldn't be tensions or nobody would feel left out. So in that way, you can say we are practicing the first method, the Samukha Vinaya, always being face to face. What do I think is the reason why the Buddha emphasized right view as the most important of the 6 principles of cordiality? I personally think it is kind of the reason that I talked about, because right view is so fundamentally opposed to pretty much every other person in samsara. And there's only a very small number of people who will agree with you on right view. So if you have right view, you really want to practice the path. You really see there is no self, and there is no. I mean, you really have seen anatta, and you really have seen the dukkha in samsara and how everything is impermanent, and you really want to practice the path. You have this sense of samvega, the sense of urgency, and if a community has that, then they will really value other practitioners who have the same view as them, because they're so hard to find. And because if the group is together, then usually conditions are better than if people have to do it on their own. So, and because that is so rare, that's why I think that is the fundamental quality or the fundamental principle. And if you have right view, then everything else kind of falls into place. Then you really want to keep precepts, and you really want to practice metta, and you want to get along with the other members of your community. So that's my thought on the question of right view. And Aum asks, Aya, it seems these can transfer to laymen, conflicts and living cordially. Your thoughts? So I think you're asking if lay people, if these can also be applied to lay people. So yes, definitely. I think at least the 6 principles of cordiality are very important to practice for everybody, whether Buddhist or not, whether monastic or lay. Practicing metta, keeping sila, sharing is something that everybody can do, whether they're Buddhist or not. And the methods for resolving conflict, I think some of them can be applied to lay people. For example, when you have a conflict, that everybody meets together, that nobody talks behind their back, is of course fundamental for resolving the conflict. Other things like offense issues aren't really applicable to lay people, because you don't have the procedures to clear offenses, and you don't have the commitment to keeping all these rules in the first place. But yeah, I mean, like, definitely large parts of the sutta are also applicable to lay people. So I don't see any other questions except for the Chinese questions from Bhante Sudaso that I will address separately. Another question has popped up. Jens asks, Aya, what role do you see faith as having in right view? So you're asking if just having faith in right view, as opposed to actually already having attained the breakthrough to proper right view as the one that you get in stream entry? Is that your question? So, of course, most practitioners on the Buddhist path are not stream enterers, or have not made the real breakthrough to the Dhamma yet, so they are practicing on faith. And people, yes, how does faith help in right view? Yes, of course. If you don't have faith that the Buddha's path works, then you don't have any incentive to practice, and you don't have any incentive to study and learn about right view. You don't gain the intellectual knowledge. You don't meditate. You don't actually practice in a way. You don't put the conditions into place that are necessary for people to eventually attain stream entry. So faith is absolutely fundamental, definitely. Faith, and also various other qualities such as energy, such as not giving up, every day picking you up again and yourself up when you feel lazy, or when you feel, this path isn't going anywhere, and never giving up, just, keeping going. So energy is another quality that's very important. And of course, then other things fall into place, like your sati will get stronger, and your wisdom will get stronger, and your samadhi will get stronger, and eventually you will develop all the factors that you need to make the breakthrough. So faith definitely is very important, but is not sufficient in and of itself. And Dan says, it feels sometimes like the whole world is parasitic and driven by greed. I sometimes feel resentment towards the system. Is this like right view or is it ill will? I believe mixed. Is this familiar? And he adds, I feel a lot better with well-directed metta. Yes. Yes, I think many people have that feeling, especially in our modern times where we are so fractured and we often don't we often feel that our jobs are not really fulfilling and they're not really meaningful, and that we work for big corporations that don't have any interest in our well-being, and that our whole societies, I mean, the capitalist societies, they are driven by greed. The whole system, of course, the system of our society is based on greed. So that is a kind of right view, but the right view that the Buddha talks about is much more fundamental. The right view that the Buddha talks about is truly deeply seeing the three characteristics of existence, that is anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and the non-self, or you can say emptiness of all phenomena. So that is much more fundamental than just thinking that the whole world is driven by greed. But it is a step in the right direction. I mean, it is a good starting point. And where you sometimes feel resentment, of course, that is kind of natural. And it's important to use that resentment in a skillful way. So that can give you the energy to actually practice the path and to take steps in the right direction, and to show you that really something needs to change. But don't cultivate. I mean, focus on using that energy for a wholesome purpose. Don't just cultivate the resentment because you think, oh, that resentment is giving me a lot of energy, so now I will really focus on resentment. So if you use it to develop unskillful qualities in your mind, then obviously it's not the right way to go. But if you use it for a good purpose, then it's a starting point. But of course, over time, the resentment should reduce if you practice in the right way. And Kumu says, Dan, you're not alone. Yeah, I think many people can relate to that. So there are no further questions so far, and we've already been going for quite a while, so I think this might be a good time to wrap up. It was nice sharing this time with you today. I really enjoyed it, and we will end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I hope to see you all next week.